Let me ask you something. Have you ever walked into a room where everyone already decided who you were before you even opened your mouth? Because the moment I stepped into my sister's wedding, that's exactly what happened. I was the poor relative, the afterthought, the one seated carefully, just far enough away to not ruin the photos. And what no one there realized was that by the end of the night, that same room would fall completely silent because of me. Stay with me, because this isn't just a wedding story. It's about how people treat you when they think you have nothing, and how fast their respect changes when the truth walks in. Before we go any further, subscribe, like this video, and share it with someone who's ever been underestimated. You're going to want to hear how this ends. Here's the first loop. That morning, the ballroom glittered like money pretending not to exist. Chandeliers, champagne flutes, gold flatware catching the light just right. Every detail screamed status. And yet, when I arrived early, before the stylists, before the panic, the glances told the real story. The smiles were polite, the jokes were quiet, the assumptions were loud. No one asked what I did. No one wondered how I lived. They already knew, or at least, they thought they did. Here's the second loop. Because for 20 years, my family had been telling a version of my story that no longer fit reality. And I let them. Not because I was ashamed, but because sometimes silence is the sharpest strategy. What they didn't know, and what made this wedding unforgettable, was that the groom's world and mine had already collided long before he ever put on that tuxedo. And when he finally recognized my name, everything changed. If you think this is about revenge, wait. Because the real moment didn't happen at the altar. It didn't happen during the speeches. It happened when someone tried to introduce me, and the groom gently corrected them. That single sentence rearranged the power in the room, and I watched quietly as people recalculated everything they thought they knew. Subscribe now if you believe respect shouldn't depend on appearances, like if you've ever been labeled the less successful one. Share this story with someone who knows what it's like to outgrow a family narrative, because next I'll tell you what the groom said, why my sister froze mid-smile, and how one wedding exposed the lie everyone was comfortable believing. Let's begin. I walked into my sister's wedding as the poor relative. I walked out making it painfully clear who was actually in charge. That sentence was not meant to be dramatic. It was simply the truth, carved into the day in gold table settings and white roses. The whole thing, every whispered joke, every strained smile, folded into a single moment that proved how little effort it takes for people to believe the story you stopped telling about yourself. I arrived that morning early before the hairdressers and the last-minute florist panic. The ballroom was all chandeliers and champagne flutes pretending not to clink loudly. White linen, gold flatware. Someone had taken 100 photos of the centerpieces and sent them around like a declaration. My sister Sophia had chosen everything to sparkle. She deserved that. She had rehearsed this day for years. She had every right to it. What she didn't know, or perhaps chose not to see, was that for 2 decades my life had been moving in a direction that didn't fit the family's old script. I lived in a penthouse 2 neighborhoods over. Not because I wanted to be ostentatious, though plenty of people would have used that word. I'd fought for that view 3 cities, 2 mergers, and countless late-night deal calls. A 4,500 square foot apartment with floor-to-ceiling windows and a skyline that behaved like a citizenship. It was mine. I bought it. The glossy magazines had been polite enough to feature it once as a quiet corner for executives who crave light, as if sunlight alone made reputations respectable. The penthouse was a monument to autonomy and to the fact that I had refused to be anyone's backup plan. But from the moment I stepped into my parents' house that morning, I could feel the old labeling settling back on my shoulders like a coat I'd outgrown. Aunt Patricia greeted me with a smile that was equal parts pity and excitement. She patted my sleeve as if I were a fragile thing who might crack under the weight of plates and small talk. "Madison, dear, you look different," she said, as though my taste in dresses should somehow be evidence that I had finally decided to stop trying. My mother moved like a stage director in a family play she'd written and never bothered to revise. There was always a cadence to her attention, applause for whoever fit the narrative, a quiet, performative indifference for the rest. When she looked at me that morning, it wasn't the cool gaze of someone checking on a daughter. It was the measuring stare of someone allocating resources. You could see the gears working. Who needed what? Who deserved which public displays? Decades of this had taught me to read that calculation quickly and to step away from it before anyone handed me the role they'd script for me. Sophia's fiancé, Brian, was at his best that morning. Nervous, amiable, the kind of man who would spend the day making sure everyone felt included. He greeted me with a proper hug and that embarrassed laugh people use when they're trying to be reassuring. There was nothing about his manner that suggested complicity with whatever the family had planned. He seemed, until everything went wrong, authentic. Later, he would be the one people watched, waiting for him to act. That waiting would be the hinge of the whole evening. We were a small, well-drilled cast. Uncle Tom had the duty of overseeing the vendor checklist. Cousin Derek hovered like a social media manager, trying to catch every angle for the live stream. Dorman James, who had known me since I was a kid, had the look of someone who recognized how easily reputations were rewritten in a room full of people. There were microaggressions, small things, but they accumulated. That's the trick of being the invisible child. 1,000 pinpricks that tell you where you're allowed to stand. An offhand joke about my not having settled down yet. A cousin's laugh when I mentioned my work trip to Singapore. Someone asking, "So, Madison, you still living in that apartment?" With an eyebrow zipped up toward the roofline of the ballroom as if the world ought to be keeping tally. I kept my voice steady. I answered the questions I wanted to answer. I did not explain my life to people who had never asked and then acted surprised. If I learned anything as an executive, it was to conserve energy for when it would have impact. There are infinite arguments you can win in your head that don't change anything in the outside world. I'd chosen battles that moved boards, not egos. Still, there was something else in the air that morning. A thread of conspiratorial whispering that quickened when I walked past. I noticed it because I had learned to notice. People's habits, the way a sentence was cut off when someone with a point to make saw you, the shift in eye contact when the conversation turned to gifts and logistics. The whispering had a shape to it, a skittering excitement that felt rehearsed, like a chorus waiting for a signal. When I asked what they were talking about, they clucked like hens. "Oh, family stuff," Aunt Patricia said, the way people use family stuff to mean, "We're deciding something about you, but we haven't given you the dignity of telling you what." My sister brushed it off with a smile that had the rigidness of someone trying to keep an audience calm. A text lit my phone. My assistant Hannah had a running commentary all morning because she liked being useful. She sent a photo of the penthouse windows, a note about a package the building had received, and a line that made my stomach hollow. "Sophia's friends were looking at your IG. She's posting the engagement toast pictures early." I scrolled and saw a screenshot of a family group chat. There was a thread with the subject line, "The announcement." It wasn't the message itself that alarmed me. It was that the decision had already been made. I could feel the space where agency should have been, the soft, warm space where a family decides together, had been closed off and sold as a spectacle. They'd planned to present my life as a gift, a narrative in which I was generous, humble, freeing my sister from the burden of climbing on her own. The gift would smooth everything. It would make me the saintly relative who made a sacrifice for family cohesion. It would absolve them and flatten me. The idea of my life as a prop simmered with indignation. We were enacting a classic family script, the accomplished child who must give back publicly to be accepted privately. If anyone deserved a sacrifice, it sure wasn't going to be me. So I went to the wedding with a plan that had nothing to do with theatrics. I was going to be present for my sister. I wanted to hear her say her vows and watch Brian stumble over his accent when he tried to quote some romantic line. I wanted to be a witness rather than an exhibit. But I had prepared myself to refuse an offer that was never actually offered to me. We moved through the ceremony with an almost cinematic calm. The vows had that small, private electricity, Sophia's hand in mine, nervous breathing, a few tears. The officiant spoke with the easy cadence of someone who had done this too many times. The photograph flashes felt like punctuation. The first block of the day had gone well by every standard the family used to measure success. After the ceremony, as champagne circulated and guests swapped tiny handcrafted canapes, the murmur returned and grew teeth. My father, Richard Hayes, who had always been a man of careful public gestures, took the microphone. He had the look of a practiced speaker, measured, a hand in his suit pocket, the other adjusting his cuff. Everyone turned. Even the teenagers streaming the event had paused their commentary. "You all know how proud I am," he began, voice steady. "A good toast is a weather system. It makes noise and then leaves you feeling either sunny or stormy. Sophia and Brian have built a beautiful life in these 2 months of planning. They deserve..." He paused for effect. "They deserve every opportunity to flourish." Polite applause scattered. I could see guests checking their phones, looking to each other to see if someone else knew what he meant. I had a suspicion. I'd seen too many quiet decisions that looked big and public at the exact wrong time. Then he delivered the line like a ceremonial badge. "So, as a token of our love, Sophia and I, well, our family, have decided to gift her a new home. The penthouse at Hayes Tower, a place for them to start their married life." The room was a light that turned on and swallowed the rest of the world. People laughed in the way people laugh when they are uncertain whether they should be happy or embarrassed. Brian smiled in that practiced, charitable way you use when you've been given an unexpected spotlight. Sophia's face filled up with tears of staged surprise, the kind that coordinates with social media captions. That's the performance. They had rehearsed it. The words were always the same. "We've decided," as if I were an actor who had played my role and didn't need to be consulted. They'd scripted my poverty into a virtue. They'd turned my autonomy into an act of charity. My refusal arrived in a voice that I had practiced to be calm, an instrument tuned for clarity, not for dramatics. "No, I did not agree to that. It's my home. I bought it." There was a small pause that felt like a silence on a stage where the sound system had suddenly cut out. "Madison, we thought..." my father began, the in-speech pivot parents always use when something threatens to undercut the narrative they've chosen. He doesn't address the wrongness of the action. He addresses the logistics of the show. "We thought it would be a symbol." "A symbol," I said. The word tasted like something someone else had eaten for me. My refusal was simple. No metaphors, nothing to validate their need to feel moral. "I'm not giving it away." You could feel the temperature in the room change. The live stream counter in the corner of someone's phone blinked up in real time. 1-200 watching. Someone had already started pointing a camera. Some people in the crowd looked annoyed, as if I had broken the evening's decorum. Others looked fascinated, because there's a human hunger for a small collapse when everything else is pretending to be perfect. My mother's face shifted. It's a small thing to watch, the way someone's expression collapses into a shape meant to command sympathy. She moved like a woman who had been given instructions and then discovered an actor had refused to play along. Her hand reached for the microphone. I saw the motion that meant escalation. She spoke as if the speech had been written 3 decades ago, and she was pulling the lines from memory. "Madison, we raised you to be generous," she said, voice gliding into righteous territory. "It would mean a lot to your sister." The audience leaned in. Generational scripts sound better in groups. I flinched perceptibly, not because her words hurt in a physical sense, but because they were the old ledger, the one where love is counted in favors and accounts get settled publicly. But I also knew how this story ended. If I agreed to her framing, my life would be turned into their symbol. My work, my independence, my choices would be praised as charity, and I would continue to be invisible under the garb of generosity. That's the moment when the stakes stop being about money. They become about dignity. I kept my composure outwardly. Inwardly, my chest was tight, a knot of decades. There's a particular clarity that violence of the quiet yields, an understanding that you can be polite and still be firm. I did not raise my voice. I did not plead. I simply repeated, "It's mine. I bought it. I will not." And then my mother crossed a line that had always been there in the family. She reached out and hit me. The slap was an old, small, animated thing, but performed with the weight of an outdated rite. It made the room inhale. It broke the thin film of scripted civility over the event. The sound was not a dramatic crack so much as a punctuation, a cruel full stop in the middle of vows and toast and clinking crystal. It shocked for a precise second because it was both intimate and public. She had chosen to humiliate me in the place most people would expect me to feel safe, my sister's reception. You might imagine from movies or tear-jerkers that such a moment spirals into immediate melodrama. Sometimes it does. In that pause, everyone was watching to see what kind of person I would be. A spectacle of collapse or a study in quiet reclamation. You could feel the live stream's comment field spooling up. Someone exclaiming, someone offering sympathy, someone making a smart joke. Cameras tilted. Someone in the second row cursed softly. I picked up my earring from the carpet. It had clattered off in the impact. That little motion, fingers finding a small, precious object and securing it, was an almost ritualistic reclamation. I did not scream. I did not cry in that moment. I chose the strange, irritating option to be steady. My movement away from the table felt very measured. I headed for the ballroom door like someone who knew the route, who had plotted a course in advance, who had rehearsed leaving without surrender. Outside, the music on the other side of the glass still rushed like a river. Inside, the room felt suddenly smaller. For a number of people watching, the story might have ended when I walked away. Poor relatives shunned, dramatic moment over, everyone returns to their champagne. For others, the narrative was only beginning. I stepped into the cold air of the hotel corridor and leaned against the marble, trying to quiet the echo of clinking crystal and murmurs. My breath came out in 2 quick puffs. I opened my phone and called Marcus. Marcus Chen had been in my life for longer than most mentors last. He was part strategist, part moral interpreter, and part CEO who knew how leverage lived inside a corporation. He owned 40% of my father's company through a complicated set of business ties and long-negotiated deals. He'd taken me under his wing when I'd been an overworked, undercredited analyst eager to be useful. Over 10 years, he'd become my professional sponsor, and, more important than any title, someone who knew how to translate corporate power into protective action when necessary. When I called, my hand didn't shake as much as my stomach did. I hit speaker, and the line connected. For a moment, Marcus's voice was distant, low, thoughtful. "Madison?" he said. His question wasn't surprised. It was the calm of someone who knew the possibility of trouble in a family as a particular kind of skill. On the other end, I could hear fabric movement, some background office hum, and someone saying something that trailed into the line. I didn't fill the silence with details. I was efficient. I placed words in a sequence like commands. "They announced my penthouse as a gift," I told him. "My mother slapped me." There was a pause long enough that I could count the seconds. "Where are you?" Marcus asked finally. "Outside the ballroom. It's live-streamed." I could see the numbers on someone's phone in my head. I could imagine the way the camera pans, catches a moment, and then the moment becomes a thumbnail on other people's days. "Stay there," Marcus said. There was none of the performative warmth you get from false allies. He sounded like someone who was thinking 3 moves ahead on a chessboard. "Don't engage. I'll be handling this." I held the phone to my ear as if the line were a tether. "Marcus," I said, softer, "you can't. This is my life." "I know," he said. "I know." The corridor felt thin. The air smelled like hotel soap and lemon. People passed, floor show staff in aprons with worried looks, a bridesmaid with smudged mascara, a florist carrying a box of peonies like something sacred. I leaned back against the cool stone and felt the whole day narrow to a point that was, for the first time in years, not being shaped by my family's version of me. A part of me, the executive part, had already made a list while walking to the reception. It was not a list of revenge. It was a list of actions that would close off an attempted theft of agency without escalation. Document the assault if necessary. Limit access to my property. Call whoever needed to be called to make sure there were witnesses to what had transpired in a public forum. I have never loved dramatics simply for their own sake. I loved the economy of decisive moves. So I stood there in the corridor, phone to ear, and let Marcus have the first move. Inside the ballroom, the sound reshaped itself around the absence of my presence. The conversations that had been murmurs shifted into a gossip, people arranging the moral geometry of what had happened. Some were shocked. Some were not. Some were already composing narratives in their heads to justify the force used by the family matriarch. There were always people who preferred tidy stories that allowed them to avoid messy loyalties. For a long time, I had been the tidy one for them, the girl who would keep the family ledger balanced by giving when asked, by sacrificing when it was convenient for their conscience. Now my refusal and the slap had rearranged the room's geometry. It had shown the underlying balance of power. It had revealed how, for them, kindness was often a currency traded for reputational tidiness. My phone vibrated against my palm. Marcus's name flashed and then a voicemail indicator. The call cut. No, it didn't cut. It was a transition. People sometimes think that power replicates itself in volume. It doesn't. It's quieter. It's the measured application of resources and relationships that terrifies those who thought their power unassailable. I went back into the ballroom. The way people looked at me when I re-entered was different now. Eyes tracked the fact of my return like a weather monitor tracking a storm. A few hands clutched at drinks. The musician paused on a chord. Someone, probably Brian's brother, kept streaming. The counter ticked upward, 1,642 watching. The world always leans in where there is friction. At the head table, Sophia's face had that strained smile again, the kind that was trying to be forgiving and frightened at the exact same time. Brian was looking at my father as if waiting for him to shift into explanation mode, some diplomatic retrieval that would save the evening. When I walked up, my father made a gesture like a man attempting to soothe a surprise he hadn't considered. He said the kind of sentence older men use in public. "Madison, we can talk about this privately." "You announced my home to 300 people without asking me," I said. I kept my voice level. I wanted to be the adult in the room. People seemed to value that more than melodrama. My mother's eyes hardened then, as if someone had dialed a color out of the air. She had expected either my gratitude or my humiliation. Instead, she was getting my refusal. Her hand, which had slapped me, trembled in a way that made me wonder whether she had not only offended me, but also herself. People who hurt other people at parties often need applause for their authority. When no one gives it to them, they recoil. "Madison," she said, the name softening, then sharpened. "We don't ask for money. We don't ask. This is for your sister." This game had been rehearsed. I'd seen 1,000 versions of it in my life. If I had capitulated, the public check, the "look how noble you are" applause, that would have been their version of family love. I have never believed in currency conversions when it comes to respect. There are some debts you do not owe. Before anyone could set the evening back on its happy track, a hand on my shoulder from behind startled me. It was James, the doorman. "You okay, Miss Hayes?" he asked quietly. There was a patience in him that felt like a sixth sense for what should happen next at my father's gatherings. He had known me long enough to know that I wasn't a drama queen. His presence was steadying. I looked back at the head table. Brian's expression was unreadable in a way that made my stomach flip. He had that hesitant smile that had been charming earlier. Now it looked like he was balancing 100 opinions at once. The room hummed, cameras focused. The live stream counter ticked higher. People began to murmur about whether he, the groom, would say something. I could see the way eyes flicked to him, the same way they had been flicked to my father a half hour before. In the court of public opinion, the new thing everybody watches for when a scandal hits is whether the person nearest to it will intervene. If the person who matters, the groom in this case, stood up, the narrative could shift. If he didn't, the moment would calcify into something else. I did not want him to be the hinge. I wanted my actions and the truth to be enough. But we live among people who understand rituals. Sometimes someone else's simple declaration of allegiance is what lets the rest of the room breathe. I breathed in. I felt odd, almost childish, wanting him to see me as I really was, rather than as the role they'd prepared. I wanted him to understand, not for salvation, but to see how wrong the framing had been. If he stood up and said, "This was not okay," it would be an important counterpoint to a family story that had always erased me. People are always waiting to see who will be the hero in other people's dramas. I had trained myself to be the hero of my own. Standing there among the glitter and the quiet cameras, I allowed myself to feel the tiny human hope that Brian might side with truth rather than spectacle. Then my mother, who had been pacing the line between social grace and domination for decades, began to speak again, her voice syrupy and practiced. "Madison, think about your sister." She nodded toward Sophia with a maternal, courtly gesture. "This is not about you, it's about family." And that was when someone shouted from the back, a voice trying to be useful. "You don't get to decide someone else's life, Mom." It was a small opening, the kind a needle makes in a seam. People leaned forward, hungry for what would happen next. I heard the live stream comments spike. Someone asked, "Is she okay?" Someone posted a tear emoji. People were starting to pick sides, typing for witnesses rather than for truth. My phone buzzed again. Marcus had left a message. "Meet me at the hotel bar in 10 minutes. His tone carried the weight of someone who expected to be needed and had organized his resources accordingly. I slipped the phone back into my clutch. 10 minutes was a lifetime in a ballroom full of people ready to be dramatic. My decision was made the way all good decisions are, with clarity about the smallest next step. I would not be the scene. I would not feed them drama. I would go speak with a man who could translate the awkwardness of my family into something that would stop them from trying to reframe my life publicly. That was not vengeance. It was prevention. I rose from the head table to gather my coat. I straightened my shoulders, simply. People watched, waiting for either a collapse or a spectacle. I chose neither. I wanted to be the least interesting thing in their narrative, because the more attention they gave me now, the more oxygen they would have to pretend that my life was a piece of their moral project. As I walked to the coat room, the sound of the ballroom followed me, a dull roar with bright laughter threaded through. The live stream counter clattered up, 2,100 watching. A woman at a nearby table whispered something and looked right at me as I passed, her eyes wide with a crude hunger for scandal. I wanted to tell her that she was in the wrong movie. The hotel corridors smelled of lemon and something sweet, and the fluorescent lights softened as I approached the bar. Marcus was there already, waiting with that precise calm of his shoes quietly scuffing the floor as if he'd practiced this stance for emergencies. He didn't rush to speak in the way some people do to soothe. He waited. He had a presence that made people quiet down around him like a tide being pulled in. "Madison," he acknowledged, standing up. He did not look away when I met his eyes. "Tell me everything." When I begin to tell him, I do not begin with the slap. I begin with the 1,000 small moments that let you read a room, the way my mother had rehearsed the words, the way my father loves the optics of control more than the messy business of consent, the way my sister had let the family script run its course because she was terrified of rocking the boat on her wedding day. I told him, calmly, about the screenshot of the family group chat that had told me the announcement was coming, about Aunt Patricia's cloying, about the public toast. As I spoke, Marcus listened like someone taking inventory. He made a single note on a napkin in block letters. He didn't offer immediate promises. He assessed. Part of being powerful is how boring your strategy can sound in conversation while being devastating in execution. I liked that about him. When I reached the part about the slap, my voice tightened slightly. It's one thing to be misrepresented. It's another to be physically humiliated in front of people you came to support. Marcus set his jaw, but it was not a jaw set for headline-grabbing revenge. It was a jaw set for necessary consequence. "Stay in the room for a few minutes," he said. "Let me get something in motion. Do not engage. Let me make a phone call." I watched him lift his phone as if he were tuning an instrument. I realized then how small things in life are. A man who holds 40% of your father's company makes a different kind of noise in the world than people who have only the capacity to gossip. He had relationships and leverage that would make the family think twice. Agency and leverage are not the same thing, but they often travel together. I felt both relieved and aware that relief works differently when it arrives through other people's power. He left a card on the bar before he walked away. A slim thing with his name and a number. It felt like a talisman. When he finally spoke into the phone, I could see his jaw working through the words. He was calm. He sounded prepared to make the room uncomfortable in a way that would force reconsideration, which was precisely the point. I returned to the ballroom. The chatter had become a chorus again, some people angry, some consoling, some delighting in the scandal. Everyone was waiting for the next move. The room had shifted polarity. Something structural had happened, and people were realigning. I sat down where I had been, the center of a storm I had intentionally walked back into. I took a sip of water as if it were some expensive habit. I scanned the room, cataloging faces. Some were sympathetic, some were not. Behind Sophia, Brian shifted his weight like a man who had been holding an answer on his tongue, unsure whether to release it. I felt watched, and in many ways that was the point. Visibility has a quality that cuts both ways. It made me vulnerable in one sense and protected in another. The public eye can rescue you from private slander because public witness imposes cost on those who overreach. That's not a moral calculation I relish. It's simply a practical observation formed from a decade of watching markets and reputations. The band struck up a new tune. It felt like a civil ceremony of business. People laughed a little too loudly. The live stream counter climbed toward 3,000. Comments scrolled. Some supportive, some cruel, some plain old disinterested. Somewhere in the noise, I saw a colleague's name appear in a comment thread, then disappear. People at work were watching, really watching. I knew that once Marcus started to move, things would not revert to their old shape. He would bring pressure in ways that had nothing to do with revenge and everything to do with correcting a reckoning. That kind of pressure changes things. Contracts paused, phone calls made, clients reminded of the stakes of association. It is boring and efficient, like corporate governance itself. For now, the room only had my family's version of events, their attempted narrative. I sat and let them try to sell it. It's a curious thing, to let other people keep talking when everything you know about dignity tells you to shout. I let them talk because I had better use of my voice. Let them talk. Let them think the silence is weakness. But silence is porous. It leaks the truth in small ways. People begin to suspect the performance is hollow, and that suspicion grows, like a crack in plaster until the whole wall needs repair. As the evening wrapped around speeches and dessert, I could feel the tilt. The air smelled like coffee and candle wax. The camera angles started to catch the little fissures in people's faces. That fissure would be important later. How people choose to fill the silence when the narrative they were offered is no longer believable. I checked my phone again. Marcus had texted, 48 hours. It was a small, utterly corporate time frame. It had the sound of a businessman setting a deadline rather than a vendetta. It made sense. Pressure is more effective when it's organized and timed. It also meant the evening was not going to be swept away like an awkward stain. The consequences would outlive the bouquet tossing and the band's last song. That was the thought I carried with me when my father rose to speak again, his face suddenly pale with a calculation I recognized. When the optics turn, the stakes get real. He attempted a conciliatory phrase, something about gratitude and family. His voice tried to stitch the day back together with the same hot glue he used for charity and status. It was then, as the crowd held their breath between performances and dance numbers, that someone at a table 2 rows back laughed too loudly and tapped their phone like a metronome. The laughter was brittle. Brian's brother, the one who'd been streaming the whole day, shifted in his seat and glanced at his screen with something like confusion. The live stream comments were moving faster now, and a particular comment rose to the top that made a ripple through the crowd. Isn't Madison Hayes the exec who led the Pacific merger? Why would she need to give away her home? The question was like a match to tinder. Heads turned, eyes flicked. The moment someone else outside of the family began to clue into the reality of who I was, the story my parents had tried to dress me into started to lose its grip. People want to believe a story that looks consistent. When the story is inconsistent, the fabric begins to unravel. I watched Brian's face as that comment threaded through his brother's live stream. For the first time that evening, something shifted there. His brows knitted in a way that suggested he was processing more than a polite sentence. The groom, who had been the kind of affable man you trust to hold a door but not necessarily to disrupt a family night, looked at me as if he were suddenly reevaluating the frame of the entire event. That was the hinge. The tiny moment where someone who had been expected to perform a script instead found themselves confronting the actual person who had been miscast. His expression was the prelude to a choice: to accept the family's staged version of charity or to see me as I truly was. The room hummed. The camera kept rolling. I sat still and let the moment settle, because sometimes the smallest recognition from another person is worth more than 100 apologies. It would not be the end of everything, but it felt like a beginning. I inhaled and looked at Brian. He opened his mouth, and for a beat there was a tremor of honest consideration there, an unpracticed hesitation. It could have been the start of a defense of his family. It could have been a different sentence entirely. I don't know yet which it would be. For now, the room remained on that edge, waiting for him to act. I realized in that sliver that whatever happened next would define more than just an evening. It would define the frame in which my family's version of me would be remembered by the 3,000 people watching and by the network of clients and colleagues who would see this ripple in their feeds. Visibility can be weaponized. It can also be a mirror. How you choose to look into it changes things. My phone buzzed again. Marcus's message read, "I'm on my way. Don't escalate." The instruction was simple and surgical. My mind supplied the list of what that might entail: documentation, a conversation with the right person in the company, a gentle reminder sent to the shareholders who cared about integrity. It would be work. Work I was used to doing. I set my phone on the table and folded my hands. For now, I let the room watch me, watched the movement of people deciding which story they preferred, and felt an odd, steady confidence that comes from knowing you will not be written over without a fight. Not with melodrama, not with vengeance. With clarity and the measured application of resources and relationships. The band launched into a tune about long-term happiness. A couple rose for their first dance. Glasses clinked, and Brian's expression shifted, the thought forming into something I couldn't yet name. That tilt, that look from the groom, was the hinge for what would come next. I felt it like a draft under the door. It was not the final act. It was a moment pregnant with possibility, one that would either bend the room toward truth or allow my parents to drag our family's story back into the comfortable old script. I took a breath, feeling strangely calm. I had chosen to be present in a way that refused to capitulate. I had called for help. I had not asked for a rescue so much as a partner in making sure my agency was not stolen on my sister's wedding day. That decision felt righteous and human. The music swelled and a dozen phones pivoted to catch what would happen next. The night had narrowed into an axis. The bride's joy on one side and the family's attempt to alchemize charity into acceptance on the other. Somewhere inside the throng, a man named Brian was about to make a choice that would change the tenor of the evening, and perhaps more. I rose, smoothed my dress, and prepared to watch what would happen when the groom realized, finally and clearly, who I actually was. If you've ever felt invisible in a room full of people who insist on telling your story for you, drop a comment right now. I see you. It'll be the smallest permission, but sometimes that's all it takes. When Marcus's name lit my phone and he said he was on his way, the room had the smell of sugar and denial. He actually arrived before I expected, not in a dramatic movie-style entrance, but with a calmness that made the chandeliers look anxious instead of triumphant. He walked in like someone who could turn a conversation into an event no one would want to lose. No raised voice, no grand gestures. He had a presence that rearranged the air. He didn't come to the microphone. I think that was deliberate. He stood a few feet from the head table, placed his hand on Brian's shoulder to get his attention, and asked if he could borrow the mic for a moment. It was a small move with a large intention. He was inviting Brian to be part of this correction, not commandeering the moment himself. Brian looked at Marcus like he was calculating whether the temperature in the room had shifted enough to make a moral move. Then he looked at me. There was the tiniest hitch in his smile, the kind that said he was understanding something new. He had seen my life the way the family had framed it, comfortable to pity, useful for optics. The live stream showed 3,000 faces and their comments. For a second, you could hear the room through the clinking glass, a chorus of people waiting for a hero. Marcus put the mic to his mouth and spoke directly, cleanly, without flourish. He used language you hear in boardrooms more than ballrooms. Measured, factual, unavoidable. "I want to clarify something that might not have been obvious here tonight," he began. Madison Hayes is not a beneficiary in need of charity. Madison built the penthouse herself. She has been the principal architect of projects that moved markets. She is also a significant stakeholder in this family's business structure. He didn't elaborate on corporate mechanisms or cite clauses in a way that would sound like legal advice. He didn't need to. He spoke in a tone that mattered. He named what was true. And that naming had weight in a way that my own words had not in that room. At that precise moment, a comment on the live stream, someone in the back of the room had scrolled slower than the rest, popped up larger than the others. "Isn't Madison Hayes the exec who led the Pacific merger?" It was a small, ridiculous thing, a digital breadcrumb, but it landed with the force of an anchor. People in the room saw that comment. Brian saw it on his brother's tablet. His face went from polite concern to the expression people get when they've just realized they were misreading a painting for years. He stood. It was not theatrical. It was the simplest possible thing. A man who had been given a frame to play domesticated in the middle of his wedding night got up and rejected the props. He walked to the edge of the stage and took the mic from Marcus as if he were choosing to speak, not being handed permission. "My sister's marriage is not the place to rewrite someone else's life story," he said. His voice was steady. He looked at my parents and then at me. "Madison, this is not right. You do not owe us or anyone an explanation for your life. If my family thinks it's acceptable to humiliate you in front of our guests, then we have to rethink what we call family." It was a small, brave sentence. It unspooled the scripted narrative like a seam being pulled. Silence does something in a room. It forces people to choose how loud they want to be in their defense of what's true. Brian's words made that choice visible. My mother blinked. My father set the fork down so hard it rattled. Sophia's smile collapsed into a look of sick confusion. Some guests applauded out of reflex, polite for the groom who'd spoken. Others were stunned. Others still shifted in their chairs because the story they'd been eating for dessert was suddenly bitter. Brian didn't call off the wedding. He refused to let his wife's day be a stage for someone else's moral theater. He asked his guests to be quiet, and then he turned to my parents, not with fury, but with a kind of imploring steadiness that made you see the child under the suit. "This isn't the way you show love," he said. "Publicly deciding what someone must give is not generosity, it's theft of dignity. I won't be part of that." He didn't shout, he didn't demand reparation. He simply refused to validate the performance. The room held its breath. Somewhere in that held space, my mother realized her hit had a consequence she had not anticipated. The man who now called our family into account was the person for whom the whole party had been arranged. Marcus remained calm. He was the quiet hand on the lever. He said only what needed to be said next. "There are consequences to this behavior that will extend beyond tonight." People leaned in because consequences are more than words when a person with responsibility starts to enumerate them. He spoke plainly about integrity, about the way partners and clients look at incidents like this, and about reputational risk. I could see boardrooms recalculating in his eyes. Again, he didn't prescribe legal steps or theoretical punishments. He spoke like someone who knew how decisions ripple. He used the words accountability and review and stakeholders. The terms landed like a warning bell. Public reckoning can have real costs. The room murmured. Guests who had been smiling now had small frowns. The live comments accelerated into a chorus. My mother's face shifted through a dozen emotions in a few seconds. Outrage, calculation, shame, and finally to a look I recognized as fear. It was the fear of people who have always been shielded by deferential applause, who suddenly find the applause withdrawn. You could almost see the ledger that had defined her life tremble and fall. It all seemed to happen in real time and, at the same moment, like a slow film. Brian's intervention had made the grim choreography of my family's guilt visible to people beyond our little world. The narrative my parents had planned, the one where I sacrificed my autonomy for family love, started to look brittle. People did not like brittle. My sister came to me then. She didn't approach with the staged surprise of the earlier toast. Her face was raw and small. "Madison," she whispered, voice breaking. "I didn't know they were going to... I'm so sorry." Her apology felt ineffectual and sincere at once. Information, I learned, can be withheld in the same way affection can be withheld, selectively and always with an agenda. I accepted the apology with whatever kindness I had left for that evening. It wasn't a sweeping reconciliation. It was an acknowledgement. She had not planned the slap. She had been swept up by the version of us her family wanted. That mattered. It didn't erase the moment, but it gave us a place to start the conversation later, when things were quieter. The immediate fallout was brutal only in the way networks are. Within an hour, the livestream was clipped into a dozen short videos and posted everywhere. Someone in the crowd uploaded a shaky clip of the slap. It made the rounds with outraged captions. Other clips emphasized Brian's remark about dignity. One video juxtaposed the slap and Brian's words. It became the clip people shared with the headline, "Groom calls out family humiliation at wedding." Within 24 hours, the story had reached people who mattered to my parents in a way they couldn't ignore. A client of my father's, someone I had met at a charity dinner years ago, sent a terse email asking for clarity. A vendor delayed payment. The company's public relations person called an emergency Sunday meeting. I did not invent this. I watched as decisions were made around phones and in conference rooms about whether association with a family scandal was worth the risk. Marcus did exactly what he said he'd do. He made the costs of their behavior visible. He didn't shout them, he outlined them. He had a way of framing things that forced people to consider what they'd chosen to be associated with. He contacted some of the company's major partners, not in anger, but in a firm exchange about values and risk. Contracts were reviewed. Partnerships were reconsidered. It was all quiet, administrative noise, which is to say it was effective. My parents panicked. Panics make people simpler and smaller. They wrote a public apology that suited their tone, proper, a little perfunctory, as if apologizing could be done by a committee. While privately, my mother posted a string of defensive updates on her social feed that read like someone trying to reclaim the moral high ground. Her post had a mixture of regret and a defensive edge. It was as if she were apologizing for the impact while insisting on the principle that justified the action. Some family members applauded her bravery. Others, particularly the younger ones, were visibly embarrassed. Sophia's honeymoon itinerary changed. Not because of me, she deserved that week away, but because the family energy had turned stormy and the couple needed distance. It felt strange that a fight about my autonomy could affect her wedding plans, but that's how entanglement works when reputations are the currency. Outside the family, something more interesting happened. Colleagues who had watched the live stream reached out with messages that were plain and direct. Offers of support, congratulations for holding your ground, and invitations to speak at panels where women in leadership discussed boundaries. Marcus, to his credit, didn't try to take the moral victory for himself. He made sure to give me space to decide what I wanted next. Within the week, I received an email from a partner firm, someone whose team I had led on a difficult merger years earlier, offering public recognition of the work I'd done. My inbox filled with messages from people who had, until that night, only known me as a name in a corporate memo. For the first time in years, those two parts of my life, the woman who negotiated multi-million deals and the daughter who sat at family tables, communicated as equals in the public eye. You might expect a triumphant courtship of social approval after an event like that. That's not what happened. Instead, there was a slow, steady reconfiguration. Some people who had always benefited from my quiet generosity were unsettled. Others, who had never been invited to the ledger, suddenly realized they had misread me. The real victory was not in the viral clips. It was in the reorientation of relationships, the colleagues who now treated me as someone who had agency, and the family members who had to choose what to do with that reality. In the end, my parents' business took a hit, not because of any dramatic lawsuit, but because the market hates ambiguity and reputational risk. A supplier paused a multi-million-dollar contract. A charity event where my father was due to speak withdrew its invitation. Board members called for a review. Again, I want to be clear. None of this is a neat moral arithmetic where you press a button and justice happens. The world of business is messy. Reputational consequences are a blunt instrument. But they were real, and they forced my family to reckon with the cost of their actions in the currency they most respected. What I did in response was practical, and to myself, humane. I tightened security around the penthouse. Not out of spite, though that would have been cathartic, and not to engage in petty theatrics, but because I saw how quickly my life could be presumed to be public property. I changed access codes. I updated emergency contacts. I told the building management who was and wasn't allowed to enter. None of those moves was revolutionary. They simply closed doors that had been open to people who would have treated my home like a stage set. I also documented what had happened at the wedding. I wrote down names, times, and a narrative in my own voice. Documentation is not the same as litigation. It's a record. It helped me feel less at the mercy of memory and more in control of what the truth looked like. I did not seek to weaponize it. I held it like an archive of a day I wanted to understand rather than a dossier of revenge. Marcus supported my career in the most valuable way he knew how. Within a month, he recommended me for a leadership role managing a new initiative at his firm. It wasn't a titular favor. It was a promotion that put me in charge of people and budgets and strategy, an acknowledgement that I belonged in rooms where decisions were made on my merits, not as a symbolic sonnet about sacrifice. His endorsement carried the credibility of someone who understood markets and performance, and the board agreed. I accepted, and I decided very deliberately what to do with the first bonus that came with it. I didn't want a headline about generosity when the last headline had been about coercion. I made a modest donation to a scholarship fund for women entering finance. It felt apt. It was support for future autonomy, not a public spectacle about virtue. My relationship with my parents changed. That is the simplest and most complicated sentence in this story. Some bridges burned a little. Some doors were closed for reasons of self-preservation. My mother issued an apology that read like someone who was learning the vocabulary of regret. She asked for private conversation. My father, who had always conflated control and affection, called me and sounded uncertain, as if he didn't know how to be both a parent and a person who had been publicly corrected. We did not have some cinematic reconciliation overnight. Some days they adjusted, other days they regressed into old patterns. A lot of people want tidy endings. They want a dinner scene where everyone reads scripture and holds hands and promises to do better. That's not what happened. What happened was far more realistic. Awkward dinners, small apologies, and real conversations about boundaries that were, frankly, overdue. Sophia and I took small steps. We had a conversation on a bench in the park 3 weeks after the wedding. She cried. I listened. We did not make sweeping proclamations. I told her what I needed, respect for my autonomy, and that she didn't have to be complicit in the rewriting of my life story to keep peace. She heard me. We reimagined our relationship without the old scripted roles. Sibling, ally, friend. It was honest and slow. I think it will be the most enduring thing from that night. A sister who finally understands the cost of a public performance. Some relatives apologized. Aunt Patricia sent a handwritten note that smelled faintly of the perfume she always used. Cousin Derek messaged me a clumsy, genuine expression of regret. Uncle Tom avoided the family calls for a while, which I accepted rather than judge. People process differently. A few family members never apologized. Some doubled down in private. I accepted that too. You cannot force an apology into every pocket in the house. Professionally, I leaned toward mentoring. I started a small initiative at work to provide coaching and leadership training for women promoted into executive roles. Maybe that sounds corny, but I wanted to turn a painful episode into something generative. If the wedding had highlighted a culture that rewards spectacle over dignity, then my work would reward competence and respect for boundaries. I also made one other practical decision. I set firm boundaries about what I would tolerate in family gatherings going forward. That didn't mean exile. It meant logistics and accountability. I stopped attending events where I would be expected to perform sacrificial gestures for the emotional comfort of others. I agreed to 2 family dinners a year where the guest list and agenda were transparent. It was a pragmatic way to be connected without being available for public consumption. People ask me, often and sometimes with an edge, they ask whether I regret calling Marcus or whether I wish I'd handled the slap differently. The truth is that I don't regret the way I held myself. I don't think of it as a vindication, because that's too small a word for what unfolded. It was for me an insistence on agency. I refused to be a prop. I insisted that dignity matters more than easy public narratives. The groom's realization was the hinge that allowed other people to see what my family had tried to hide. That moment, when Brian stood and refused to let the staged charity continue, did not fix everything. But it did something quieter. It altered the frame. People remembered the night not as the evening the generous daughter disappeared, but as the night she stood her ground and was seen. A month later, we met for coffee, Brian and Sophia and me, without the rustle of a wedding around us. Brian's voice was honest and low. "I should have known," he said. "I should have asked more." It was not an excuse. It was a confession. He told me he felt ashamed at how quickly he accepted the script that his family put in front of him. We talked about what allyship looks like in small moments. Not the dramatic heroism, but the quiet refusal to accept an injustice when it appears in your living room. He asked whether I wanted to stay in touch. I said yes, but with candid boundaries. No more family events orchestrated as performances. He nodded. The wording felt mundane, practical, but it mattered. Support is not always a public stance. Sometimes it is a private consistency, showing up differently, refusing to replay the same old tape. Later that year, when I walked into the penthouse and opened the curtains over the skyline, there was a new kind of silence. It wasn't the silence of isolation. It was a quiet that comes from having a place where your story is your own. I had friends over. People from work who laughed loudly and told jokes they didn't hold back. James, the doorman, visited once with a bag of Chinese pastries. We ate them on the living room floor like people who'd chosen each other. Rebuilding after that night didn't mean building a wall. It meant building thresholds that worked for me. I reconnected with people who chose to see me for who I was, rather than for the role they needed me to play. I invested in relationships that felt reciprocal. I invested in my work in ways that allowed me to create structures that honored boundaries for others too. What I'd learned most from that night is not a dramatic moral about punishment. It's the plain fact that visibility can be a tool you use thoughtfully. When you're visible, you have leverage, not in a vindictive way, but as a way to protect your selfhood. It was not a lesson in revenge. It was a lesson in choosing where to spend your energy. I had spent years on projects and people who returned value in measurable ways. My refusal that night was another kind of investment, in my dignity. People sometimes ask whether I regret the family fracture that followed. My answer is complicated. Estrangement is not the only outcome for every family, and it's not a badge of honor. For us, distance became a way to prevent repeat offenses, not a trophy for being wronged. I'm careful with that line. I believe in reconciliation when it is real and safe. I also believe in the courage to choose your own life when remaining requires erasing yourself. In the months after the wedding, I got a surprising number of messages from strangers telling me the story changed their lives in small ways. A woman in London wrote that she finally told her mother she wouldn't fund her son's life with her own retirement money. A young analyst sent a note saying he had decided to stop sacrificing his weekends to keep people pleased. Those messages were private and quiet, the kinds of ripples that mattered more than the headlines. They reminded me that one person's insistence on dignity can be permission for others to do the same. The last time my mother and I had a long conversation, it was over tea in my kitchen. She looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with age, and everything to do with being unexpectedly small in a world she had expected to command. We did not tidy the past. We talked about what she had learned about pride and the ways it can turn people into caricatures of themselves. She said haltingly that she had always believed she could buy the respect she thought was deserved because she had built everything else out loud. It was not an apology in the cinematic sense, but it was the beginning of something that felt like honesty. My life after that night was not spectacularly different at surface level. I still worked long hours. I still negotiated hard. I still loved the particular satisfaction of closing a complicated deal. But the edges had shifted. I was less available to be flattened into someone else's story. I had taken small, substantive steps to make sure my autonomy couldn't be theatrically rebranded into a virtue for others. If there is any blunt moral here, it is this. Boundaries are not about punishing people who have wronged you. They are about teaching people how to treat you going forward. They are about creating a field in which your dignity is non-negotiable. That field can be guarded by legal instruments, by friends with influence, by careful documentation, by locks and passwords, but ultimately it is guarded by consistent action. Saying no when a public performance demands your silence, walking away when dignity is being auctioned, and choosing relationships that treat your being as an end, not a stage prop. I do not recommend drama. I recommend clarity. I do not recommend severing ties as a reflex. I recommend assessing whether the ties you maintain honor who you are. I do not have a one-size-fits-all answer. I only have the story of what worked for me. Steady refusal, strategic support, and a willingness to let the truth be visible. That wedding taught me something else too, which is that sometimes the person you hope will save the evening is the one who chooses to do the small necessary thing, to speak truth calmly, to refuse spectacle, to stand with you in front of witnesses. When Brian stood, he did not perform a hero's entry. He made a quiet choice to be decent in a moment when the decent thing was unpopular with the people who had always been loudest in our family. That was his recognition, not just of who I was professionally, but of who I was as a human being deserving of respect. So yes, the title is accurate in a way that feels vindicating without being vengeful. I walked in as the poor relative in their story. I walked out as the person who refused to let my life be rearranged for a photograph. The groom realized who I actually was in that charged, very human moment. His realization didn't fix everything, but it made a difference. It created space for consequences to unfold and for relationships to be renegotiated on more honest terms. If you took anything from this, I hope it's this. You do not have to be silent when a narrative about you is being written without your consent. Quiet choices can be powerful. Calling in help doesn't make you weak. It makes you strategic. And the people who really belong in your life will show up, not to perform, but to stand with you when it counts. If this story resonated with you, share it with someone who needs permission to choose themselves. And below, tell me one boundary you're setting this month. I read every comment, and there is something profoundly human about naming the line you will no longer cross.